would be watching? Is there a metric?
Sir, magsa-start na po tayo.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's okay, sir. May 100 plus participants po dun sa isang Zoom link, I think.
Already? Oh, I didn't know there was another Zoom link.
Meron pa sa YouTube din. At saka maraming...
Will they be able to make comments or?
They can set their question. Di ba, Frank?
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, let's start.
Okay. Mute na ako. Si Frank na ang bahala sa inyo.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Frank, and together with our organizers, we welcome each and every one of you to tonight's webinar. This event is organized and presented to you by the College of Architecture from the University of the Philippines, Diliman, and the Environmental Landscapes Studio Laboratory. This is also in partnership with the Philippine Association of Landscape Architects, Diliman Environmental Management Office, UP Diliman, the Philippine Association of the Japanese Government Scholars-PHILAJAMES National, the UP Circle of Landscape Architecture Students, and the Research and Extension Office of the College of Architecture. Tonight's webinar is entitled SANDBLAST, an online discussion on the environmental and human effects of using dolomite as beach nourishment strategy for the rehabilitation of Manila Bay. We are very fortunate to have with us 4 experts who will be sharing their expert knowledge on this topic, which recently stirred quite a lot of exchange and discussion in various social media platforms and online forums. I would like to introduce to you our 4 speakers. He's a multi-awarded designer in the fields of landscape architecture, and urban design. He was an apprentice to the likes of architect Cesar Concho and our national artist Ildefonso P. Santos, before founding his own firm, PDAA Partners. Having a bachelor's degree in both landscape architecture and architecture from the University of the Philippines, Diliman, he took his master's degree in urban design from the National University of Singapore. A well-published author and writer, his advocacies include heritage conservation, public parks, and open spaces. With over 3 decades of experience as a design consultant, he is a current board member of the Escuela Taller de Filipinas Foundation and current chairman of the Board of Landscape Architects at the Professional Regulation Commission of the Philippines. We have with us tonight landscape architect Paulo G. Alcazaren. Sir, please say hello. All right.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. And looking forward to this exchange this 5th of October. Or is it the 4th?
The 5th, sir.
The 5th.
All right. Next, we have a well-versed researcher on the topic of community ecology, biogeography, and marine biology. He has a bachelor's degree in fisheries taken at UP Visayas, a master's in both marine science and statistics from the University of the Philippines, Diliman, and finally a doctorate in marine biology from the James Cook University in Australia. He has a wide experience as an associate professor and researcher, which includes projects such as the ecological diversity of fouling organisms in Manila Bay, Urban Ecology Network for the University of the Philippines, and methods for assessing the ecological health of Philippine beaches. Let's all welcome a professional aquarist, a prolific researcher, and academic from the University of the Philippines Institute of Environmental Science and Meteorology, Dr. Benjamin M. Vallejo, Jr.
Hi, and good evening. Thank you for giving me opportunity to contribute some knowledge about Manila Bay, especially this very important forum. Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening, sir. Third, he is an outstanding scientist and academician of the National Academy of Science and Technology. He is well recognized in helping local and national leaders and environmental managers in local advocacies. He obtained his bachelor's and master's degree in geology from UP Diliman and his doctoral degree from Rice University in Houston, Texas. He has produced numerous research publications in the fields of marine and coastal geology, sedimentology, and seismic stratigraphy. He was also twice an awardee of the UP Centennial Professorial Chair Honor. Currently, he is a professor at the Marine Science Institute of the University of the Philippines, Diliman. We have with us tonight Dr. Fernando P. Siringan.
Magandang gabi sa inyo. So looking forward to hearing from everybody. This is a different crowd and I hope to learn many things from you as well. Magandang gabi.
Good evening, sir. Last but not the least, our fourth speaker graduated with a bachelor's degree in basic medical science from the College of Medicine, UP Manila. She recently garnered 3 notable awards, namely the Ramon Abarquez Most Outstanding Fellow in Training from the UP Philippine General Hospital, Most Outstanding Fellow in Training from the Philippine College of Chest Physician, and she is a Young Investigator Awardee from the Asia Pacific Society of Respirology. Now on her post-residency fellowship, she is currently a Medical Officer Level 4 and a Chief Fellow at the Philippine General Hospital, a Next-Gen Telemedicine, a Research Assistant at the Philippine Internal Medicine Textbook Development, and a Clinical Instructor at the Centro Escolar University College of Medicine. Say hello to our fourth speaker for tonight, Dr. Mithi Kalayaan S. Zamora.
Hello again, everyone, and I'm very fortunate to be with such distinguished panelists. So I'm looking forward to tonight's event. So hopefully we get to learn from this activity tonight.
Thank you. Thank you, Doctor. Additionally, we invited 3 reactors to share their thoughts on our panel's main points. We have Dr. Lumberto G. Mendoza, who is an assistant professor of philosophy at UP Diliman, who had an extensive experience in teaching various ethics and philosophy courses in UP Manila and UP Los Baños. And then we have Dr. Maria Stephanie Faith Gayan, professor and vice chair of the Department of Pharmacology and Toxicology from the UP College of Medicine and investigator trialist of the bioavailability unit from the same department. And we have landscape architect James P. Bunyo, who was previously an acting director of the campus maintenance office and is now the acting director of the Diliman Environmental Management Office. After which, we open our floor to all your questions. These may come from the Environmental Landscape Studio Laboratory YouTube page, from which we are currently streaming live, as well as from the Zoom link prepared by the Research and Extension Office of the UP College of Architecture. Just a quick gentle reminder to all our participants to kindly turn their audio to mute mode so as not to disrupt the viewing pleasure of the discussion and presentation of tonight's webinar. Let us now start with our first panel expert. We welcome landscape architect Paulo G. Alcazaren. Sir, please.
Thank you, Frank. Let me share my screen.
Sure, sir.
So are we good? Does everybody see the screen? Is it animated?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me. And this evening, to get straight to the business of the webinar, it's a blast from the past. We'll look at Manila Bay's historic and cultural context. I'm sorry. May I do that again? This is the wrong deck. Yes, it is the correct text. So blast from the past, Manila Bay's historic and cultural context, and I'm going to present this from the point of view of anthropogenic impact through the lens of urban planning and landscape architecture. So historically, we have not had many settlements until the 12th century, or any settlement of a sizable area until the 12th, and the Spanish came, of course, in the 16th century. So we look at the Spanish. I'm sorry, James, I have a little problem. Can you give me 1 minute, please?
Sure, sir. So maybe just while waiting for landscape architect Alcazaren, um, just a minor technical difficulty. This happens to all of us. Okay.
Am I on now?
Yes, sir. It's on. Yes,
There
sir.
you go. It's the right deck. I should have deleted that previous deck. So let me start again from the Spanish period. The Spaniards, of course, came in the 16th century, and we look at the impact of settlements to Manila Bay from the 16th to the 19th century very quickly, when the population of Manila only was from a few thousand to 250,000 at the end of the 19th century. So when the Americans came at the transition from the Spanish, there were only 250,000 people living in Intramuros and its arrabales surrounding Manila. So the impact on the bay was not very great, and it was mainly used because it was a good harbor, and the Spanish, of course, came to Manila after abandoning Cebu as their capital, because Manila had that bay and because it was more proximate to their actual target, which was China. So not very much intervention in the bay until the late 19th century, as Manila expanded, and there was a requirement because of the opening of the city and the country to international trade, to the building of a port. So the port of Manila was planned but not actually built. In the late Spanish period, you can see here at the lower left, the project for the port improvements was put on paper, but only started in terms of a breakwater as Rizal was being walked down here in the Malecon over to the Luneta for his execution. Only the breakwater had started, and the Americans took over the port improvement and the reclamation of the port for the South Harbor in 1899, and did the reconstruction until about 1904 for most of the reclamation of the port. And they most probably used material sourced from Makati, because Makati was the source also of building material for Intramuros. So the fill needed for the port area was in all probability from the surrounding area, plus additional rock and stone from Guadalupe and quarries around Laguna de Bai. So the Americans took over, and as the new capital of their colony, they hired Daniel Burnham to produce this 1905 master plan, which he had intended for a maximum carrying capacity of 200,000 people. Of course, at the time he prepared this plan, the population of Manila was just over 250,000. But this is the Burnham Plan of Manila, most of which was not seen through, except for certain areas in the center. As you can see here in the lower right, there was an intent to reclaim land for both the coastal road to Cavite, as well as the residence of the Governor General. But of course, what happened was that the Governor General took Malacanang as his official residence, and that reclamation never pushed through. But here you can see the reclamation of the new Luneta, because as the port was being built, Daniel Burnham saw that as you stood on the old Luneta, you would not see the sunset anymore, and the view of Manila Bay was compromised. So he proposed extending the foreshore by 1,000 feet or over 300 meters, and that's why we have that extension at the tip of the old Luneta to the new Luneta. But what is most important to us is the intent of extending and connecting the city of Manila to Sangley Point, which was already selected by 1904 as the headquarters of the US Navy. And it was important to connect the capital with Sangley Point. And that is through a proposed sea boulevard, which was never and until now has not been completed. We stopped at 2 kilometers, which is about where the CCP is, in the 1930s. But the coastal road, of course, now is being pushed through both vehicular and by rail. One of the most important things in Burnham's plan was the provision of 4 large parks and 9 playfields. The large parks all have a cumulative area that would be equivalent to Central Park in New York, but the 4 parks are in Harrison, in Santa Ana, in Sampaloc, and in the pristine beaches of Tondo, because 100+ years ago, Tondo had very nice sand. So this is the original Manila Bay sands on the beaches of Tondo, and the surveys of the American scientists show a lot of coral all along the shores of Manila, all the way to Sangley Point. So this is an aerial of Manila in late 1937, and by that point, Manila had grown to about 450,000. And I showed this population indication to make the point that the impact of the human settlement of Manila and its surrounding towns on the bay was not very large, because there was a lot of area still in between the towns, as well as within Manila itself, for expansion of all of the functions and the building of all of the edifices needed by the residents and the authorities. So this you have here, Harrison Park on the lower right, Dewey Boulevard, which eventually, of course, is now known as Rojas Boulevard. The Luneta, both the old Luneta and the new Luneta, you see the extension of 1,000 feet or 300+ meters, and then you have the South Harbor and Intramuros. And the Manila Bay was one of the attractions for tourists and, of course, locals. And this coastal highway was, in fact, an influence of Frederick Law Olmsted on Burnham. And this is what is called a parkway. So this parkway, which Burnham put in his plan connecting to Sangley Point, was actually built in the late 1930s, because and completed in the late 1930s all the way to the edge of Manila, but not beyond that. In fact, you will see here in the next picture, in the next slides, Manila was the sophisticated city. So the view, and this is a view from the Bayview Hotel towards the horizon that had Cavite and Sangley, was of course the beaches of Pasay, which until the 1960s was still there. This is an area of Manila in the late 1930s. That's Luneta. This is actually the Eucharistic Congress of 1938, if I'm not mistaken. That's why there's a vertical element there. But you can see here that the US Chancery, because we had already shifted to the Commonwealth government, they decided to build a US Chancery because the Governor General abandoned Malacanang to Manuel Quezon. And so land was given by the city of Manila to the US government for the building of its chancery, which is today the embassy. And Dewey Boulevard was finally planted to palm trees and shade trees, but it ended at Pasay Beach. So this is the edge of Manila, and Pasay Beach was where a lot of people also had their seaside estates, including the Manila Polo Club, which had its original Polo Club grounds there. So the next intervention in Manila Bay came at the end of the 1930s, because at that time the capital was now had a connection from mainland United States through the to the Clipper Plains. The first Trans-Pacific planes landed in Manila Bay, but their docking was in Sangli. So they decided that a more proximate area for the seaplanes was to be built, and this was planned, which is the Central National Airport at the edge of Manila. You can see here Harrison Park had not been completed yet, but you already had the Rizal Memorial, and this large area was intended to be the Central National Airport. Of course, there were two other smaller airports, which was Nielsen and Grace Park. But if you notice here, the seaplane basin was for the Clippers, while the Central National Airport was for the planes that had to land on land. It was never built because of the intervention of war. So in 1959, after the war, Manila had started to recover even in terms of population, but the impact on the bay was still minimal. You can see here that the American embassy was already built. Dewey Boulevard, still named Dewey, not yet Rojas Boulevard, extended still to the same area, which is the edge of Manila and Pasay. And beyond that, you had Pasay beaches. And this is the yacht club. And this was these areas. This is the Rizal Monument, Manila Hotel. And this area of Pasay was actually chartered as a national park and was named Pasay Beach Park Number 1. So the CCP actually sits on what was originally a declared national amenity or public park or national public park. And the Manila International Airport had now already been transferred to Nichols Field. So in the 1960s, you still had beaches in Pasay, Parañaque, and Las Piñas. You can see in the horizon Manila, and people used to go to these beaches all the way to the beaches in Cavite for their recreational needs. But the Manila Bay Sands was not the original proposed reclamation and amenity for Manila, or proposed by the Manila mayor. The first was by Antonio Villegas, who in 1963 had a plan for reclamation along the 2 kilometers of Dewey Boulevard. And this was the proposal of Villegas in 1963. But it's interesting to note, it was not for real estate, but as an amenity for a public park, because in 1963, his project to take over Rizal Park was nipped in the bud because Eva Macabagal wanted that project for herself, and eventually it became Imelda Marcos's. So this reclamation was a project by Villegas to provide, under his control, a public amenity. He even tried to take back the US Embassy. Of course, he failed. And right next door, the actual first beach that was proposed by a mayor was by Mayor Cuneta in 1963 also, and a very interesting project because it's in the site of what was supposed to be that central airport in the plans of 1941. And this reclamation was already started. Unfortunately, the person that Cuneta had put in charge was an American businessman by the name of Harry Stonehill. And the Stonehill incident, for those of you as young as myself, led to the suspension of that project in 1964 or 1965. But you can see here that a proposal for a Boracay-like sand beach reclaimed from the sea. So in 1964 to 1969, there was supposed to be this structure in Quezon City that was to celebrate the Philippine-American cultural ties, but it was never built in Quezon City, and Imelda Marcos transferred it to that exact place where Stonehill has started to reclaim the sea, and the CCP complex was born between 1964 and completed in 1969 for the initial structures. And this is a view from Pasay, seeing the structure of cultural center at the horizon. The sea was still there. And in 1969, we celebrated the beauty of Pasay beaches with this to Miss Universe Gloria Diaz, and I've forgotten who the other one is. I think that's Maricara Saldariaga. I think she was Miss International. Very quickly, in the martial law era, the expansion of Manila, which by then had already pushed to 2 million, was seen as expanding to 4 or 5 million. So in 1975 to 1986, the master plan of Manila included extensions to what eventually would become Metropolitan Manila, the 16 cities and 1 town today. But you can see here already, because of the start of the reclamation, they had proposed extensions or reclamations of the sea in Manila Bay as well as Laguna de Bay. And on the government center, which was not yet built, they suggested 2 areas, one in Quezon City, which became the Batasan Pambansa, and one in the reclamation area, which was to be the financial center, as well as the structure in the center. It was supposed to be the new Malacanang, but it was never built. And what stands in its stead is, of course, now the Mall of Asia, where you have it all. In 1980s, they continued the reclamation, and this is the very clear picture of what drives reclamation. And the government sold all of this area to Mr. Tanyu, eventually to SMDC, to Federal Land, and to Asiana, and to the casinos, because of the lack of space to expand real estate in Metro Manila and the difficulty of dealing with thousands of landowners. Most real estate developers prefer large parcels of land, which they can easily convert into mixed-use development or whatever their agenda is. And that's why reclamation is such an attractive option for real estate developers. So Manila Bay 2019 to 2030, this is the reality of our metropolis today. You see our airport, you see the reclamation as it stands. But what is projected in the next 20, 30 years is this reclamation. There are over a dozen proposed reclamations that will take us all the way to Sangli. But there's an option. If they move the international airport to Sangli or to Bulacan, which is problematic, maybe Clark and Sangli would be better, it would release 1,600 hectares, which is currently very, very low floor area ratio. That means you can't build high buildings, or you can't maximize because of the limitations of the landing and taking off the planes. But if you move the airport, there is much less need to reclaim the area from Manila Bay. But who are we kidding? The real estate companies really want reclamation. So finally, In 2015 is the last major interventions along that portion of the reclaimed area, which was done by our company for the previous administration because of the damage to the breakwater. We did this Baywalk redevelopment in 2015, and we put one of the first segregated bike and jog and pedestrian paths in the country here. Of course, now we have Iloilo. And this is the reality of our whole metropolis today. There are 12.8 million residents in 619 built up square kilometers, but there is only 0.2 square kilometers on parks and open space per person. But what can be done is something like what Paris did. This is the Paris plage since 2002 in the summer. They put sand along the embankments of the Seine, and the Parisians and the tourists love it. So in Manila, they could turn the Pasig River into the success that Iloilo has had with the Esplanade, which is now in phase 9, which makes it about 5 kilometers long on both sides of the Iloilo River. So finally, we go to the problem of Dolomite and the fact of beach nourishment, which is an option taken by a lot of cities and countries that are dependent on beach tourism. In 2020 or this year, 61,000 tons, 16 million worth of project by the U.S. Corps of Engineers had to be done because the last intervention in 2016 had already eroded. So what's the justification for beach nourishment? That means taking sand from a nearby site by dredges and filling back. It's to keep the real estate values, because real estate values are dependent on the attraction of the beach. So tourist receipts and real estate taxes in the United States, the Caribbean, and other places have seen to bring in 5 times more than the cost of nourishment. Unfortunately, that nourishment has to be done every 5 or 6 years. So it makes the justifications much less than original. And the rates of accidents from rip currents and sandbars are 3 times more. So with that little context for history, culture, and the effects of human settlements, I turn it over to the next speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you, landscape architect Paulo Alcazaren. May we hear now from Dr. Vallejo, please?
Okay, let me share my screen. Okay, here it is. Okay, first, I will give a quick briefer on the Manila Bay Coastal Strategy of the DENR. So our colleagues from DENR referred me to their website and some materials on what the coastal strategy is for the next until this year. Okay, as you can see, I have an animation of the beach here, because all of the discourse now is about the beach in Manila Bay, and architect Paulo has already gave you an background that there were a lot of beaches in Manila Bay before development happened. So anyway, let me go into the whole issue here about the rehabilitation of Manila Bay. And just to give a historical background, rehabilitation isn't really a new idea, but the Mandamus of the Supreme Court is a remarkable intervention of the Supreme Court. Rehabilitation of Manila Bay even dated back to the time of President Macapagal. And I think architect Paulo Alcazaren has gave the context about all these developments, and some areas were reserved as a amenity, a natural park amenity. But the rehabilitation of Manila Bay is closely tied up with the cleanup of the Pasig River. And even during the time of the first term of President Ferdinand E. Marcos, that was already put as a priority. But just like any of our government initiatives, much of it was not followed through. Some aspects were fulfilled. Some beautification was done along the banks of the Pasig River and the Baywalk area during the time of when Mrs. Marcos was the governor of Metro Manila. And from 1986, with the new government of Mrs. Aquino until now, there have been many efforts to clean up the bay. However, it was the Supreme Court that essentially mandated the executive department to clean up the bay with a decision, and this is the Mandamus, GRs 171947 to 48, which directed 13 government agencies of the executive department to clean up, rehabilitate, and preserve Manila Bay, and to restore and maintain its waters to the DNR level SB. Okay? Which means certain recreational activities and contact activities swimming could be allowed to make them fit for swimming, skin diving, and other forms of contact recreation. So that's what the Supreme Court ordered on December 18, 2016. Now, personally, I've attended some of the Supreme Court hearings on this. So in my opinion, as an environmental scientist, what the Supreme Court order was really a tall order. And the Supreme Court did not put any time frame for this. It's a continuing mandamus. The Supreme Court did not put an expiry period on the mandamus. The court will review what the executive department is doing and see if it meets what they ordered. So anyway, the lead agency obviously is the DENR. And the DNR, okay, the mandamus is based on the DNR Administrative Order number 34 of 1990 that defines the class SB, okay, and that's the target really for the Manila Bay Rehab. So which means we can swim, go skin diving, and even catch fish or have some aquaculture in certain areas that will be reserved for that on Manila Bay. So the mandamus, okay, has 13 agencies. So the list of the agencies involved is DENR, obviously, as the lead agency, the DILG, DepEd, the Department of Health, DOH, Department of Agriculture, Department of Public Works and Highways, okay, the Department of Budget and Management, the Philippine Coast Guard, the PNP Maritime Group, the Philippine Ports Authority, the MMDA, the Metropolitan Water Works and Sewerage System, MWSS, and the LUA, Local Water Utilities Administration. So there are about 13 agencies that are involved in the mandamus, and each one of them have certain things that they have to do in order to meet the standard of SB, which was what the Supreme Court wants to happen. Now, for instance, DENR essentially as an environmental department is on coordinating a lot of these, a lot of the cleanup activities. The DOH is to certify whether the microbiological conditions are now suitable for recreational activities. The DA is involved in looking at the inputs of pollution inputs from the watershed, considering that it's not just the bay, but a huge watershed that actually extends up to Nueva Ecija and almost the rest of Region 3 or Central Luzon. DPWH for the engineering interventions. Budget and management, that's self-explanatory. What's the DBM's role in this is to put it in budget proposals. PCG is to implement the Maritime Environmental Law. Okay, PNP Maritime Group for law enforcement. PPA has jurisdiction over the South and North Harbors. MMDA for Other are for flood control, and also MWSS for meeting the sewage targets, and LUA for water resource use. Now, the things that we need to know about the Mandamus is this. Okay, the facts are here. Okay, only 15% of the population of the NCR are connected to a sewerage system. And for the rest of the watershed outside NCR, 3.84% are provided with sanitation services. Well, this is an improvement from when the Mandamus started, because I asked the people who were monitoring whether our compliance to sewage treatment. A few years back, it was 10%. Now it's 15%. And I think Manila Water wants to aim it at 20, if I'm not wrong, around 25% by 2020. Now, a lot of people along the bay are informal settlers. So there are about 233,000 informal settler families along the bay, especially in the rivers discharging into the bay. And only about 76% of LGUs in the Manila Bay area has an approved 10-year solid waste management plan. So the DENR has divided it into 3 phases. The first one, and this is the one that has received a lot of publicity in the last few years, is the cleanup and water quality improvement. So the things that are being done is the cleanup of designated esteros and waterways. This is already been done, not just in the present presidential administration, even in previous presidential administrations. Now, there's also a need to reduce the fecal coliform level and other toxic discharges from domestic houses, establishments, and by connecting them to existing STPs and requiring STPs for government, commercial, and industrial educational establishments. Now, this is a thing, no? While commercial establishments are now required to have STPs, okay, whether they're complying to that or not is something that the DENR has to look into. In most cases, the STPs are not enough to cover all the discharges from commercial facilities. Also, there's a need to inspect and repair leaks in old sewer lines. So this is where the MWSS would have to figures in this effort. Also, there's a need to provide temporary sanitation facilities to informal settlers residing along the esteros and shorelines pending relocation, and implement solid waste management and start planning for the relocation of informal settlers. Now, this relocation issue is a hotly debated topic. Do we need to relocate them? And if we're going to relocate them, do we have the jobs to give them in the places of relocation? For instance, my research deals on the ecology of the Port of Manila, and we are all aware that there are a lot of informal settlers there, and they provide all much of the people there are providing the stevedoring and cargo handling functions of the port. So if we're going to relocate them far from the port, okay, how can they get to work in the port area? So these are the things that we need to think about. Now, in the picture here is the newly constructed STP along the bay near the Manila Yacht Club, okay, with a green wall, okay, and was recently inaugurated by Secretary Simatu, supposed to treat the discharges from facilities and establishments along the bayfront. The second phase is rehabilitation and resettlement. First is to rehabilitate old sewer lines in NCR, relocate the informal settlers, and to ensure completion of 340 million liters a day of Maynilad and Manila water treatment capacity by 2022. This is supposed to bring up the service population of the NCR from the existing 15% to at least 25% or even more. And the third phase is education and sustainment, which means continuing education of citizens to protect the gains. Now, sustained law enforcement and monitoring, and Again, fast tracking of the sewerage system for Metro Manila. Okay, the original target was 2037 and bring that 10 years earlier to 2026, which means almost 100% of Metro Manila has been sewered. That's for phase 3. Okay, that's what the DENR would like to happen. I don't know if I have enough time to show you other slides about Manila Bay. So let me shift my screen. Okay, just to okay, this is a presentation I gave to the Manila Yacht Club about a year before the pandemic. Let me just show you that the watershed, as I said, it comprises a huge part of Region 3, reaching up to the whole of Nueva Ecija and even parts of Aurora Province. So Manila Bay has a big catchment area, and we have to account. DNR has to account for all the nutrient inputs going to the Pampanga River system, which contributes to the nutrient budget of the bay. And this is just a satellite photo from Google Earth of what the bay looks like. And the reclamation has been showed to you by architect Paulo Alcazaren. Okay, reclamation. And the various environmental problems we have here, which happen on a regular basis when the monsoons change. So recently we had a fish kill, again, that's related to the incoming amihan, which is not, the wind is about to change at this time of the year. Also, Manila Bay is historically a center of biodiversity based on museum records here and in other countries. So there's a lot of species here of mollusks. We estimated from museum records about around 300 to 400. Okay, so if we're going to look at the whole of the environment, we have to consider also preserving the biodiversity dimension. Anyway, we had done research on this for more than a decade, and we identified a lot of the environments. A lot of the environments are mudflats and mangroves, but the mangroves, more than 90% have disappeared. The mudflats are disappearing due to reclamation, and those are major habitats for Manila Bay. And we found out that the places where the reclamations are planned are the places with the highest biodiversity. This is one of the main interesting topics for anyone who wants to do a PhD on Manila Bay's environment, marine environment. The highest biodiversity is recorded in the port anchorages. After so many years of surveys here, even during the American colonial period, a large part of biodiversity is located right in front of the city of Manila. Okay. Now, there must be a reason for that. We need to find that out. Anyway, it's a tourist attraction. It's been a focus of art. And I think this is just to show you that while the sunset scape may not change, the beach is still there. However, the nature of the beach has changed. Okay, so this is La Papachea, and that's a shelly, whitish gray beach, which is naturally deposited. And the mudflats of Parañaque, which used to provide a lot of fishery resources, but are now reclaimed. And Baseco Beach, okay, which is from river sediments. Anyway, I'd like to show you. Okay, so if we're going to do cleanup, okay, there's several levels of public perception. First is people notice that there is no garbage on the beach. Perhaps, yeah, there's really some reduction in solid waste due to campaigns and interception of solid waste before they reach the bay. Then the next thing that the DNR has to look into is the bacteriological indices. Then for marine scientists, the ecological community indices. the DNR water quality standards. And if we are looking at the environmental compliance of the Port of Manila, then we have to follow the International Maritime Organization standards for ports and harbors. So it's not just the Baywalk that needs to be cleaned, even the harbor. My research focuses now on the Port of Manila and how we can make it up to the IMO standards. Again, that is a tall order, just like the order of the Mandamus cleaning up the bay. To make it to those standards would be a challenge, really. And so I just leave you with this slide, okay? This is the famous picture perfect postcard photo of Manila Bay's bayfront. This is what we call, as marine environmental scientists, as billionaires row, not because of the value of the real estate there, but the coliform count, it was in the billions, but due to the cleanup, it was reduced to the hundreds of millions, but that is still far from the 100 most probable number, which is required by the DANR before we can go swimming. So the rehabilitation has a long way to go. Okay, so this is billionaires row. When you go there to that area, think of the number of bacteria in the water. Okay, I think that's all for now, given the time that's given to me. And maybe later on, we'll wait for the questions and the reactions. So good evening again, and thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vallejo, for that discussion. Next, may we have Dr. Siringan. Sir, please.
Yeah, magandang gabi. Buksan ko lang i-share ko lang yung aking screen share. Okay. So, malamang okay lang ba na magtagalog ako? Wala namang problema. Magtatagalog ako. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Sure. Yeah, it's audible. Go ahead,
Okay,
sir.
so the first photo, I borrowed this from the internet. During low tide, makita mo yung beach at makikita mo yung buhangin kapag natanggal yung mga basura. At itong larawan na ito, kita na yung beach kasi natanggal na yung mga basura dahil madaming nag-volunteer na magtanggal ng basura. This is from the Google Earth, February 13, 2007. And this whitish patch right here, yan bali yung beach sa Baywalk area. No? At this is from CNN Philippines. Larawan nitong 2020 na ito. Makikita nyo dito sa bahaging ito, kulay gray na buhangin. At itong cream na buhangin dito, yan yung Dolomite. At we just go through and try to look at this two questions, try to answer them. Saan ba yung source ng buhangin kung naturally occurring yung sa Baywalk? Or if we step back in time, at maraming salamat kay Paul. Ngayon ko lang nakita yung mga ibang larawan doon, lalo na yung mga litrato nung bata pa yung mga dinosaurs. No? The other one, mananatili ba ang buhangin na itinambak sa Baywalk? So nabanggit ni Benji kanina na yung source ng buhangin doon sa Parañaque area, La Papachea, and then sa Baseco ay mainly galing sa ilog. No? At dito sa slide na ito, this upper right na photo, that's a typical yung look of a beach whose sediments were derived from land. Pwedeng maputi din ito, depende sa composition. In Palawan, for example, you have a lot of river-derived materials along the beach. Pero creamy to whitish yung beach kasi yung composition niya ay quartz. You can also go to Zambales, and the pinatubo materials maputi din sila. Pero madami ding lugar sa Pilipinas na yung river-derived na material sa beach ay dark gray o kaya ay maitim dahil dun sa composition niya. Yung itim, madaming mga pwedeng magnetite siya. And kung meron kang beach na ang harapan niya ay isang coral reef, then you might have something like this, no? Creamy colored sand, or it can be a bit reddish because of some reddish corals or perhaps reddish mollusks contributing to the sediment budget. At may mga lugar din na yung beach mo ay mixed siliciclastic. Nabanggit ni Paul kanina na sa Manila Bay ay madami dating coral reef, no? At sa pagkakaalam natin, ang mga lugar na yon ay makikita sa Cavite, sa bandang labas ng close to the mouth of Manila Bay, and then also in the Corregidor Island, may mga patches ng corals doon. At malaking contribution ng mga mollusk sa mga dating beach na makikita natin sa Manila Bay. And even at present, you go to La Papachea, madaming mga mollusk, mga shell, no, doon sa beach. So, ganito yung mga maaaring makita natin na itsura ng materials sa carbonate beach, no, coral fragments, no, dito bale. Ito ay halimeda. Pag namatay siya, kulay puti yung kanyang itsura, at it will break down into very fine pieces, and it will contribute to the fine-grained sediment budget of a beach. At marami sa Pilipinas, itong lower right hand na ito, you can see this, for example, that's a single-celled organism o yung kanyang test. At nabubuhay sila sa coral reef. Kapag namatay, then rin dadalhin sa beach yung kanilang test. And it can comprise as much as 50% of the sediment along the beach. Sa Manila Bay, in the Baywalk area, the major sediment source ay land derived. At sa larawan na ito, merong dalawang arrow. That's the longshore current. It's generated by waves, and they carry the sediments along. At ang isang produkto ng longshore current ay itong Cavite spit mismo. It's a depositional feature that is a product of the longshore current. And that, tanggalin mo yung spit na yan, then dati ito'y dire-diretso lang yan sa Maynila, no? So nabawasan ang sediment budget galing sa Cavite dahil sa Cavite spit. Pero ganun pa din, meron pa din namang mga sediment sources dito sa Parañaque, Las Piñas, at ang ilang sediment ay pwedeng nanggagaling din sa Pasig River. So ito ang Pasig River for during the southwest monsoon. Ang major movement ng sediment sa Pasig River ay papunta ng Malabon, Navotas, Bulacan. Pero meron ding konting bahagi na napupunta to the south doon sa Baywalk area. So ang natural na sediment doon ay galing sa ilog, pero merong mga marine component, andun yung mga karamihan bale mga shells. Yan yung tanong bale. Well, una, establish natin na itong Baywalk area is an eroding area. So artificial na siya kasi ang dami ng reclamation na nangyari mula pa sa panahon nung tayo'y nasakop ng mga Amerikano at na-turn over tayo ng mga Espanyol sa mga Amerikano. Nagkaroon ng cut-off ng sediment supply dahil sa maraming structures na nailagay na doon sa foreshore. Naglagay ng mga seawall, and that enhances the removal of sediments. And then, merong pagtaas ng dagat dagat at merong paglubog ng lupa. This is from a work that we did years ago, 1998, 1945 na bathymetric chart, and then ito ay 1961 na bathymetric chart. Pinagpatong namin sila at tiningnan ano ba yung pagbabago sa lalim ng tubig. At itong mga maiitim na parts dito, yan bale yung mga parts na lumalalim. And ano naman yan, that can be expected from the overall setting of the area, na block na yung sand source na pwedeng galing sana ng Pasig River. Ang dami na ring structures to the south of this area. So halos wala na nakakarating dito, o siguro wala na talagang nakakarating na sediment yan. Bukod doon, ito ay hard structure, it's seawall, and the seawall, hindi niya naman dinidissipate yung wave energy. No? Magbabounce off lang ang wave energy doon, at pagbalik sa dagat, kukudkurin niya kung ano man ang available na buhangin doon. At yun yung dahilan kung bakit naglalagay ng bulkhead, no? Yung mga malalaking bato doon sa harapan ng seawall para hindi tumumba yung seawall. Tumataas ang dagat at ito ay bahagi ng climate change. Umiinit ang dagat sa Pilipinas at dahil sa pag-init ng dagat ay nagba-bulk up yung tubig. Nadadagdagan ng tubig ang dagat dahil natutunaw yung mga yelo, at bukod doon may mga pagbabago din sa intensity ng trade winds. So itong diagram na ito, pinapakita bale, the numbers there are in millimeters per year. This is from the satellite data of sea surface height from 1993 to 2009. And what it shows is that all over the Philippines, except in Batanes area, yung kulay blue dito sa north part na yon. But all over the Philippines, i-round off na natin, from 1993 to 2009, tumataas ang dagat ng halos 1 sentimetro kada taon. May pag-aaral na ginawa for the period 2000 to 2014, ang nasukat nila ng bilis ng pagtaas ng dagat ay nasa 1.4 centimeters per year. Ang dagat overall ay tumataas, pero may episodes na pwede siyang bumababa, may episode na tataas, pero the general trend ay tumataas siya. Bukod sa pagtaas ng dagat, ang lupa din ay gumagalaw, at ito ay mula sa isang pag-aaral by satellite again, but this time looking at the movement of the land. Ang mga kulay pula dito sa upper panel na ito, ay lumulubog ang lupa ng 2.45 centimeters per year. At itong lower panel na ito, this for the period 2003 to 2010, ang Baywalk area ay nandito sa bahaging ito, kulay pula siya, ayan siya, lumulubog siya. So tumataas ang dagat, lumulubog ang lupa, i-combine mo yon, abay mas mapapalaki mo yung relative rise of sea level. And it's not good for the beach. This is tide gauge data for the port area. Ang kulay pula na linya ay, hindi ko makita yung arrow ko. Yun, that's my arrow, okay? Itong kulay pula na linya, that's tide gauge data. At itong kulay blue na may naka-overlay ang itim, yan bale ang sea surface height. At makikita dyan bale na nade-detect ng tide gauge na yung paglubog ng lupa. Tumataas ang dagat, yung static, pero lumulubog ang lupa. May bagyo, maraming bagyo. Nitong taon nito, nakapagtataka, wala pa talagang malaking bagyo na dumaan dito sa Metro Manila. Maraming salamat naman. Pero on the average, mga 20 bagyo ang dumadaan dito sa Pilipinas. At pag dumaan ng bagyo, lumalaki ang mga alon at was that 2011 or 2012 when the Baywalk area was flooded with seawater because of enhanced wave activity. At ang isang ginagawa ng malalakas na alon ay madali niyang kutkutin ng buhangin. This is a photo taken years ago sa Zambales. This is, makita nyo yung mga structures na hindi pa nga buo. Ayan, tumutumba na. Kasi dati ito ay malapad ang buhanginan. Pero may isang bagyong dumaan, isang bagyo lang mula 10 hanggang 40 metro ng buhanginan ang kinain ng dagat. Yolanda in 2013 resulted to erosion of 150 meters on the northern side of yung airport ng Tacloban. Well, marami ng bagyo, patuloy na tumataas ang dagat, na-cut off na yung sediment supply, pero meron pa ring buhangin sa Baywalk area. Well, yes, may buhangin sa Baywalk area, pero hindi ito lumalapad. At ang buhangin doon sa Baywalk area ay produkto ng salubungan ng longshore current. No, yung seawall, no, dito sa bahaging ito ng Baywalk, yung longshore current, if you have a current, if you have waves that that are coming from, say, a direction na pag ganito yung direction niya, ang paghampas dito, pag ganyan yung longshore, paghampas dito, pag ganito yung longshore, sa lubungan, naiipon doon bali yung buhangin, but it's not expanding. So kung ano man ang limited amount, yun yung naiipon at nadadagdagan siya, yes, pero nababawasan din siya, kaya hindi siya lumalapad. Depositional, yes, but the overall setting is that it is eroding. Well, sa beach nourishment, nabanggit na ni Paul kanina, maintenance is a must. And in the US, they do it because they earn a lot of money out of it. And they have to spend a big amount of money. So ang tanong, kaya ba nating, kikita ba tayo ng ganun kalaki, no, para mabawi yung ginastos ng pamahalaan? At kaya ba natin na i-maintain yung ninourish natin na beach? Kailangan ng engineering intervention at sa design na ginawa ng DPWH, meron na silang sand geotubes, no, doon sa harapan. At pero yung dolomite na nakapatong ay walang protection, and the angle, the design of the beach face itself ay napaka-flat. At ang tendency ng flat surface ay kapag bagyo, mas papatong doon ang tubig at mas magta-transform ang dagat into a large wave. So very likely na mas maraming tubig ang pupunta ng Rojas Boulevard at marami din na buhangin ang matatanggal doon sa nourished area. Dolomite, mas dense siya kaysa sa typical na river-derived material. Okay? Pero ang dolomite ay calcium, magnesium carbonate, no? CO3 just like calcite, it is prone to dissolution, not by seawater, but by fresh water, no? May ulan o kaya ay yung ground water mismo. At marami tayong carbonate beaches na maintain sila kasi merong fresh supply ng material galing doon sa beach. Pero may mga coral reef areas where the reef is not healthy, and then you get to see that the beach would be eroding. The dolomite is crushed dolomite. So since crushed siya, meron din siyang mga zones of weaknesses doon sa mga buhangin At kapag gumulong-gulong na siya, tumambling-tumbling doon sa beach dahil sa alon, mas madali siyang mag-break apart, magiging mas maliit at mag-i-increase ang surface area. Again, mas prone siya sa dissolution. And dolomite, of course, is also prone to abrasion. I think that's my last slide. Siguro yung huling kwento ko, ang dolomite, it does not occur naturally as a sand particle. It occurs as a mud particle. The dolomite that we now have all over the world is, they are mostly products of yung alteration ng original na material. Naging bato siya dahil nagkaroon ng alteration. At itong dolomite na nilagay dito sa Manila Bay ay galing sa bato na crinashed para magkaroon tayo ng mga buhangin. Yun na lang. Magandang gabi.
Thank you, Dr. Siringan. May we now hear from Dr. Zamora, please.
And so again, good afternoon, everyone. Good evening, everyone. And I was invited tonight to talk about the health effects of dolomite. So I am Dr. Zamora. I am a lung specialist. And tonight we'll be answering a few questions from this mini lecture. So apart from answering this question, bottom line, at the end of this mini lecture, we want to answer the question, is dolomite health-wise by the Manila Bay? Is it a yay or is it a nay? So what is dolomite? As Dr. Siringan has pointed out in his last slide, it's calcium magnesium carbonate, and some of its components include silica crystals. So it's more popularly known for its industrial applications, but what most of us don't know is before the advent of all the supplements and the calcium magnesium supplements that we have now in the market, it was previously used as a therapeutic agent and was used as a calcium supplement back then. So if you try to Google the health effects of dolomite, you'll come across some of these words. So primarily, part of its chronic health effects involve the development of silicosis from the crystalline silica found in dolomite. Pag tinry ninyo, you'll be able to find that chronic lung exposure results to the development of lung cancer. Some patients that present develop cough and phlegm, and some do report difficulty of breathing. So ang daming related with just exposure to your dolomite dust. For this particular mini lecture, we'll be using two main documents. The first one is this publication showing the safety data profile of dolomite. And then the second one is actually a medical article published by Neghab and colleagues back in 2012 showing the respiratory disorders associated with dolomite dust. So I'd like you to focus on this screen, particularly on the highlighted box. So these are the most important symptoms or side effects associated with chronic exposure to your dolomite dust. So primarily, it causes discomfort in your chest, shortness of breath, and coughing, as was previously mentioned. Although I'd like to highlight on these two sentences. So sa short sentence, twice na mention yung prolonged inhalation causing chronic health effects, as well as the repeated inhalation leading to the development of this chronic health effects. So I think we have to operationalize at this point, what do we mean by prolonged or repeated inhalation? And then, does going to Manila Bay equate to a prolonged or repeated inhalation of this dolomite dust leading to this chronic health effects? So with the literature search, we were able to find out that the mentioned population associated with increased risk and associated with prolonged and repeated inhalation were mainly that of industrial workers, particularly yung mga miners natin, and then yung mga factory workers. In fact, the studies have pointed out that they classified the exposure based on the number of months or years, and then based on the heaviness of exposure to your dolomite dust, leading to the development of symptoms. So with very heavy exposure, you tend to develop symptoms in a span of a few months to as early as 2 years. However, kapag minor yung exposure mo and hindi naman repeated, usually it takes around 15 to 20 years to develop this chronic health effects associated with exposure to your dolomite dust. Again, this was lifted from the article of Chen and colleagues in 2012 as well, showing a direct proportional relationship between the duration of exposure as well as the intensity of exposure to your dolomite dust, leading to the development of respiratory symptoms. So with that, do we consider going to Manila Bay to visit a prolonged and repeated exposure leading to the aforementioned chronic health effects? So at this point, literature has no direct evidence of increased risk among people exposed for intermittent episodes for short periods of time. So it's silent regarding the intermittent exposure, and it highlighted that prolonged and repeated inhalation was limited to factory workers, to miners, and then to the industrial workers. Going back again to the article that we're mentioning, pag tinignan ninyo ito, they did mention something about breathing dust. So in terms of handling and precautions with exposure, it was mentioned that you should not breathe the dust. Similarly, the NEGHAB article also showed that exposure and inhalation of dust led to the following respiratory symptoms. So kapag na-expose sila dun sa dolomite dust, 28 of the 39 or 71, almost 72% developed cough, inuubo, yung iba nagpeplema, yung iba nahihirapan huminga, or maputok yung ubo, o parang may halak, o parang pumipito kapag humihinga. Corollary to that, we have a statement released from the WHO, from the DOH last September 9, and then from this statement, I'd like to highlight 3 important points. So similar to our previous slides, DOH really confirms that dust really causes respiratory symptoms. So the symptoms that we've mentioned earlier were also highlighted again, such as chest discomfort and coughing. However, meron silang qualifier na dust particle size. They did mention something about it being 2 to 5 millimeters or 100 times bigger than the dust. Hence, they were able to conclude that exposure to this dolomite dust does not have or does not lead to any untoward incidents. So the question is, does dust particle size matter? So yung size ba may epekto kung magkakaroon ka ng symptoms or hindi? So let's go through it from a medical perspective. So this was the definition of WHO regarding dust particles. So 3 important points that I'd like to raise from this definition is it's defined as any small or dried solid particles with a wide range size. So it's from 1 to 100 micrometers. And then it's an umbrella term to describe anything from air pollution to pollens from trees and flowers to chemical dust to mineral dust. So any solid particles made and trapped into the air by natural forces, mechanical forces, or man-made processes may lead to the development of this small, dry, and solid particles. And they have a wide range of sizes. So how does dust cause symptoms? So you have here a pollutant that gets inhaled inside your lungs. So it travels into your airway. So when we talk about the airway, it's from the nose down to your lungs. So the airway is actually very smart because once it detects that the pollutant is not part of the natural occurring process inside your lungs, it creates an inflammatory response. So kumbaga, the soldiers of the body come into the picture and detects that this material is foreign and tries to eliminate it by getting it out of our airways. So usually what happens is there's inflammation, nagkakaroon ng pamamaga doon sa daanan ng hangin, At sometimes, nagpeplema tayo kasi the phlegm or coughing is a mechanism of the body to deliver the foreign material out of the airway into the environment, back to the environment. So clinically, that's what we feel as paninikip ng dibdib. Sometimes ito yung nagmamanifest as sinisipon or iniubo because it's a normal defense mechanism of the body upon detecting a foreign object inside the airway. So yes, dust size particle actually matters. So if you can take a look at this visual, as you can see, as the size of the particle gets smaller, its propensity to travel within your airways and get trapped within the lungs actually increases. So the smallest dust in the airway actually gets trapped inside your alveoli, which is your smallest unit inside your lungs. So this is where air exchange happens. So sumasama minsan yung mga dust particles dyan. And then the larger ones get trapped within our upper airways. So technically, when we mean upper airways, mula ilong hanggang sa may lalamunan. So yun yung pinag-uusapan natin when it comes to upper airway. So going back again, let's take a look at the size of the dust particles as claimed by DOH. So it's 2 to 5 millimeters, more or less. When we inhale this foreign material, it gets trapped in our upper airway. So mula ilong hanggang lalamunan, usually doon siya natatrap. So when that happens, there are respiratory symptoms that can potentially develop. Primarily, pwede tayong ubuhin. Kasi again, remember, it's a foreign object inside your airway. So the natural tendency of the body is to remove anything foreign from inside the airway. And then sometimes it leads to throat itchiness. So parang nagka-throat clearing tayo, parang makati yung lalamunan. And then throat discomfort, sometimes you feel na kapag nauusukan, naaalikabukan, parang nagkakabuhangin yung lalamunan. So that's what happens when the dust particles get trapped in your upper airways. Sometimes, because of the inflammation, dahil nagkakaroon ng pamamaga doon sa daanan ng hangin, nagbabara yung ilong, tsaka nagsisipon tayo. So minsan yun yung parang may nalulunok tayong sipon or may nararamdaman tayong tumutulo sa likod ng lalamunan natin. And then for other patients, sometimes when the cough gets too severe or incessant, they develop chest discomfort. So sumasakit na yung likod, nahihirapan ng huminga, associated with frequent and excessive coughing. And there are at-risk populations to developing this aforementioned symptoms. So number one, asthmatics baseline have an irritable airway. So when a foreign body gets inside the airways, it triggers the irritation even further, leading to an exacerbation of asthma. So pwede kang hikain kapag na-expose ka dito sa dust particles na to. Another vulnerable population would be your patients who are chronic smokers. Those patients that develop COPD or emphysema and bronchitis, sila kasi yung mga maplema. So ito naman, kapag may pumasok na foreign body inside your airways, nagki-create ng phlegm to dispel the foreign body. So baseline maplema, nagkakaroon pa ng dagdag na plema because of the foreign body, it precipitates the development of the symptoms that we've mentioned earlier. Another one would be the allergic rhinitis. So similar to asthma, kapatid ng asthma ang allergic rhinitis, it's actually inflammation of your upper airway. So yung mga patients that you see that frequently sneeze or cough when exposed to dust or particles, they are actually predisposed to an attack when they get exposed to excessively to this dust particles. And then some patients, na mahina yung resistensya, of course, they are baseline at an increased risk of developing these symptoms and then further complications. So in summary, so yes, prolonged and repeated exposure actually leads to the development of symptoms. So as was mentioned, literature put heavy emphasis primarily on the industrial workers as the population vulnerable to develop the aforementioned chronic health effects such as lung cancer and urosilicosis. Particle size matters. So if you can remember, depending on the size of your particle, it gets lodged and gets deposited on the various areas of your airway from your nose down to your lungs or to your alveoli. Number 3, Dust particles can cause respiratory symptoms. So regardless if it's the upper airway or the lower airway, once it gets deposited inside your respiratory tract, the natural tendency of the body is to remove anything foreign from inside the lungs. So it creates an inflammatory process, which leads to the development of symptoms. And for high-risk population, this can actually lead to adverse events or to the exacerbation of their comorbidities. So yung asthmatic na well-controlled, pwedeng maging hindi well-controlled, a COPD patient that's taking his medications and walang masyadong hingal, pwedeng mag-develop ng hingal. And then a patient with allergic rhinitis who's actually well-controlled can develop frequent sneezing and then shortness of breath and coughing when associated with exposure to excessive dust. So in summary and to conclude, yung question that we'd like to answer is health-wise, is Dolomite by the Manila Bay a yay or is it a nay? So at present, intermittent exposure for a few hours does not lead to chronic long-term effects associated with Dolomite exposure. So if you intend to go out para magpa-picture, medically speaking, that will not lead you to develop silicosis and to lung cancer. It alone, so does not lead. However, it is associated with respiratory symptoms, just like your air pollution and any other dust exposure. Especially, this is noted in very high-risk population. So yung mga asthmatics, COPD patients, allergic rhinitis, regardless if it's intermittent, prolonged, or continuous exposure, because of the predisposition to developing the symptoms, we do advise them to stay away or take necessary precautions when getting exposed to dolomite dust or any dust particles for that matter. So that's my last slide. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to discuss the medical effects.
Thank you, Dr. Zamora, for that interesting take on the Dolomite. May we now hear again from landscape architect Paulo Alcazaren for just a few more slides, please. Sir?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Am I supposed to comment?
Sir, do you have any additional slides for tonight? No anymore?
No. I'm fine. I thought
right,
we
sir.
were already in open forum.
Okay, sir. Maybe we could hear from now the three reactors we have with us tonight. Maybe we can start with Dr. Mendoza. Sir, doctor, if we have, may we have your, please.
Thank you, Frank. I just like to thank everyone for this wonderful opportunity to hear your expertise and lecture. Sabi nga ni Dr. Siringan, bago tong karanasan nito kasi interdisciplinary tayo. Tapos nakakatuwa na mapakinggan from experts and scientists yung issue ng dolomite use sa Manila Bay kasi hindi na siya siguro ganun ka-politicized. Sabi nga ni Doc Faye Cagayan, who will react after me, during this COVID pandemic, parang the desire to be informed seems to be inconsistent with my desire to be mentally sane. Minsan yung mga news, like siguro isa na to yung news on the dolomite sand sa Manila Bay. Parang isa na siya sa mga bad news na, or well, at least controversial news na hindi ko kayang pag-isipan just to be sane and focus on my health. So I guess, so I'm a practicing philosopher, but I wouldn't want my reaction to be too academic, but rather I would just draw from my experience as someone who has some kind of engagement with the spaces in Manila Bay. So before my post, so as a philosopher, I consider part of my thinking, exercise as part of my thinking. And before minsan kasi dun lumalabas yung mga ideas. And before going to Norway for my postgrad, for my PhD, I used to be an active member of a dragon boat team in UP Manila. So nakaka-touch yung, para sa akin, yung explanation ni Dr. Ben Vallejo on the Mandamus that would allow Manila Bay, the water in Manila Bay to be suitable for contact engagement, skin diving. Very personal yun sa akin kasi yung biruan namin ng mga nagda-dragon boat sa Manila Bay, either you survive and become stronger or you get some sickness. Minsan yung iba yung may sugat, nagiging gangrene, then you quit, no? So, tapos kaming mga nagda-dragon boat, nagbubunyi kami kapag bagyo kasi that's the time when Manila Bay becomes a bit clean. Siguro nataboy na yung mga basura from the Pasig River ng mas malayo. And truth be told, may buhay pa rin sa Manila Bay. Yung initiation rites namin, I remember sa Philippine Dragon Boat Team, biruan na initiation rites. We would dip, we would swim in the waters of Manila Bay. At least those who are capable of swimming. Tapos naalala ko ngayon yung sinasabi ni Doc Ben, think of the billions of bacteria that were there. So billions before, millions na. Pero actually, it does not prevent people from engaging themselves in the waters of Manila Bay. So ewan ko, siguro hindi bagong karanasan sa atin pag bumabaha sa Manila area. Hindi lang sa Manila Bay, no? Kahit dun sa mga baha, nagsiswimming yung mga bata, no? Siguro as someone who has been doing dragon boat or who has been rowing in Manila Bay, yun, nakakatuwa na merong ganong klaseng mandamus. Yung siguro ang concern ko lang, what can be done, yung magandang and how would the speakers answer that from their own fields of research. Yung sa sharing ni Dr. Ni Sir Paulo, ang ganda nung yung biro ni Dr. Fernando, yung nung panahon daw na bata pa yung mga dinosaurs, yung mga pictures na yun, ang gaganda nila, so breathtaking. So I wish we could have some kind of recovery so that the waters in Manila Bay could be that pristine. So yung nakuha ko kasi dun sa lecture ni Sir Paulo, it seems that there's really a need to reclaim Manila Bay to maintain, if not upgrade, the value of real estate. And there was this mention of a project that would somehow declog the Manila area if the airport would be moved to Bulacan. So I wonder about the feasibility of that project. Kasi feeling ko, all forms of human activity would have some damaging effects to nature. And perhaps the challenge is for us to be able to regulate it. That kind of regulation won't come from the business. Hopefully, it would come from the government if there's not much corruption. But there's also the civil society aspect. So perhaps Architect Paulo can comment on what can be done, at least from perhaps the Society of Landscape Architects or perhaps the civil society. Yun, naiisip ko kasi ang ganda ng team na meron tayo ngayon. Naalala ko yung binabanggit ni Chancellor Nemenso na sa aming mga STS affiliates at saka teachers that we need to talk to each other and perhaps add up each other's expertise so we can deal with these kinds of problems. Um, Yan, nagda-dragon boat din no si Ma'am Faye. I think my sharing is too long already. So, yung siguro yung comment ko lang kay Ma'am, kay Dr. Kalayaan, so Dr. Zamora. So I have rhinitis, so personal na, hindi siya ano. So one of the reasons I like going to the beach area is that it unclogs my rhinitis, no? So dun sa lecture mo kasi silent yung research on whether the Dolomite can cause these respiratory problems. Tapos hindi ko masyadong na-gets kung halimbawa kapag few hours lang safe siya, pero what counts as few hours for you to for the Dolomite exposure to be detrimental to your health. Tapos iniisip ko kasi I really love the beach. It's unfortunate that I'm always in Manila and in the mountains. I find the beach therapeutic, and when I'm in the beach I run, and it really helps. I think siguro running alone helps, pero when you run along Rojas Boulevard with all the jeeps and with all the cars, or perhaps in EDSA, that's a different no. So niisip ko yung sharing mo, yung Dolomite sand ba, pareho lang ba siya ng negative effects sa health dun sa pollution? So in that case, masyadong na-exaggerate na yung health hazard effect ng Dolomite do sa project. Siguro sorry, naalala ko lang yung question ko kay Dr. Siringan, who also gave a wonderful presentation. Siguro kasi yung conclusion niya, it won't, as I understand it won't be sustainable kasi the sand, the soil there is eroding and the sea level is rising. Pero kung babalik tayo dun sa lecture ni Paulo, it seems that the sand there has some value. I wonder if we can have some approximate for the sand there for the beach beach rehabilitation project there to have some value. Kasi on the one hand, nakikita ko rin yung point ng government to move on kasi may issue na timely ba yung pagkakaroon ng project na ito in times when in fact maybe the budget should be focused on the health responses to the COVID crisis. Pero I also understand the perspective of businesses, yung sa real estate, at saka siguro yung therapeutic value na may makita ka man lang maganda kahit weekend lang, no? Kasi nasa quarantine na tayo lahat eh. Ano ba naman yung makakita ka ng white sand? Of course, pwede mo kong i-criticize yan para bang yung strategy ba na to katulad ng during the time of the Marcoses when they give the public some kind of pleasure or entertainment to forget criticism. But after hearing all the experts, I think let me stop for a while and leave some room for the commentary of Dr. Gagayan. Thank you, Frank.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Mendoza. Maybe we could just hold for the questions later. We can just take them down. Maybe we can hear from our next reactor, Dr. Cagayan, please. Ma'am?
Evening. And similar to Dr. Mendoza, I would like to thank the organizers for the opportunity to be able to join you. I feel so OP out of place. Kaya I was also asking about the context. Dr. Zamora was my student. I told her, you go in and because you talk about the pulmonary or respiratory hazards of Dolomite. But I think I would also like to focus on the other effects or interaction of environment with our health. So this is just a short. I don't actually have questions for the other speakers because it's way over my head. Okay. But just to add on to what Dr. Zamora has said, let me just again introduce myself. I'm Dr. Faye Cagayan. Uh, I am actually an obstetrician gynecologist by clinical training, but I am a professor at the UP College of Medicine, a professor of pharmacology and toxicology. So it's a basic science. It's like teaching GE for the medical students. So basically, what Dr. Laya said a while ago was really the direct impact of the Dolomite, no, those sand bits to the respiratory system. But we know for a fact that the environment, everything that is around us, does not just impact us, our physicality. So these are the more obvious ones. The people are exposed to risk factors in their homes, workplaces, and communities through different aspects such as the air pollution, which is, I think, Dr. Uh, Mendoza was pointing out a while ago, no, kapag kayo mga bits ng dolomite lumilipad, gaano katagal yung exposure bago mo masabi na ikaw ay at health risk. And then nabanggit ni Dr. Vallejo yung sanitation, lalo na doon sa mga tao sa paligid, especially the informal settlers, and the presence of chemicals doon sa body of water natin. We have seen very beautiful pictures from our two other esteemed speakers. This is the first time that I got to meet them virtually. I don't think there is no other event or circumstance in my past life that I got to listen to architecture, landscape, and environmental. Dr. Siringan, I am so amazed. I actually love listening a while ago to their presentations. But the overall effect of whatever it is you were all discussing about and its impact on the person and the health is what is important to me. Okay. Pharmacology is the study of drugs and diseases, no? Drugs and the effect of the drugs on the person. Toxicology is about poison. So probably in that sense, I can think of what poisons or toxins are present in the environment. And rehabilitation is good, very good. In fact, sabi ni Dr. Vallejo, billionaires grow because of the coliforms. And we talk of coliforms in terms of their effect on the gastrointestinal system. But there are still a lot of other pollutants, no? Pero on the plus side, ano naman yung effect ng environment sa health natin, no? So these are all the social determinants of health. We just don't look at the physicality. I think we have students here who are logged in, no, who are viewing this webinar. I'm very grateful to be able to speak to you, to talk to you, to share our insights from the medical perspective. Because probably after this, the only thing that you think about when you think of doctors would be the direct impact of whatever interventions you do, no, in your profession and your health, physical health, as we are talking about. But as I teach my students, when we talk of health and wellness, for a fact, there are a lot of things that determine, ano, if a person is healthy or well. So it's not just about the healthcare system per se. And I've always maintained that health is always a political issue. So you have education, you have the social and community context, and then there's economic stability. So that this is where I take offense actually, and this is also actually quite personal for me. I took my first year, but I've been in the Manila Bay area, in the vicinity of Manila Bay for 34 years. I studied at the UP Manila campus and has been there since I was in first year college. So I am an intermed student as well. So, and then after that, did my residency at the UPPGH and did my fellowship and teaching and has been teaching also in UP Manila campus for the past 20 years. So this is all really quite personal for me. Similar to Dr. Mendoza, I have been jogging, huwag na pong jogging, nagpapanggap lang po ako, walking around the vicinity. No? So napakaraming epekto, and hindi ko po mahihiwala yung pagiging personal ng issue ng rehabilitation ng Manila Bay with my profession and with my career as a physician. So this has been pointed out a while ago, but I think most of you already looked at this. Ano? So ang issue ko is really more of the timing, because there's really no problem with rehabilitation, and it's not just beautification. I have heard from all our experts a while ago, especially the need for rehabilitating Manila Bay, but at such a time that we have not yet flattened the COVID curve. Is this really essential? Okay, or could we have diverted the funds to something else? No. So plus on top of that, look, binuksan ang Manila Bay, the white sand similar to Boracay, and there's no physical distancing at all. I can remember my horrified response when I saw this. Parang nakakatawa lahat ng memes na lumabas with regards to this picture, because there was a lot of parang Manila Bay challenge, no? Manila Bay White Sands challenge. It seems funny, but for someone who takes care, who's at the front line, someone who takes care of people who are afflicted with COVID, parang it's just really insensitive. Okay, so that is my take on this. Okay, and perhaps I was actually thinking about the mud floats. Are there any other way of rehabilitating without just dumping all the white sand on top of it? I don't want to explore and go to the mining of or quarrying of the mountains in Cebu, to get the sand and all those other issues, because that is not my realm of expertise. But my issue really, I take issue on the exposure of these people to Manila Bay because of at this time of the pandemic. So actually, if given the chance, I will talk on and on and on, but I will stop at this point.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Cagayan. Maybe we can hear from our last reactor, landscape architect James P. Bunyo. Landscape architect, please.
Hello, magandang gabi po sa lahat. Good evening. Thank you for giving us the chance to speak among such great academics and experts in this field. So kami po sa UP Demo, listening to our speakers, I can't help but make parallelisms between the situation of the Manila Bay and the UP Diliman's campus environment. So like the Manila Bay, the UP Diliman campus is an exceptional urban landscape. So a valuable environment in an urban setting. So it is one of the Metro Manila's few remaining expansive green spaces that allowed it to provide benefits to plants, animals, and human urban dwellers as a habitat for flora and fauna, even migratory birds, as many of us know, and breathing or recreational space for many urban dwellers. So like the Manila Bay, the campus landscape is evolving as a result of human activity. In particular, in the past few years, we saw an increase in construction activities in the university that is driven both by the need to address its infrastructure needs as an academic institution and growing informal communities in campus. So in the past years, there have been several incidents that show the increasing tension between the built and the unbuilt environment, as with most urban landscapes. So we hear of the different wildlife species being threatened or being hurt, and we also hear of the different open spaces being converted into other uses that affect the biodiversity of these areas. So, and as in the Manila Bay, addressing this tension is a tall order. So parang yung pong Mandamus ng Supreme Court. But kagaya nga po na sinabi ni Dr. Vallejo, it is an order that needs to be carried out. So in a way, it is also a recognition of the value that we can get from the balance that we need to achieve in these urban environments. So we are happy that last year the Board of Regents approved the Diliman Environmental Management Office, the creation of the office, which expanded its function from the what was then the Task Force on Solid Waste Management, na ang focus po ay basically solid waste management and campus, to a full office that includes the responsibilities of monitoring and protecting the air and water quality, as well as the campus's unique biodiversity. So, ang masasabi ko po SANDBLAST as a term denoting force, as a title of the lecture is very apt. So as listening to our speakers, we are again reminded of the different forces seemingly bumping into each other in the management of our urban landscape. So parang there are different blasts emanating from these factors. And as a young office, a demo, we know that we have a long way to go, but we are committed and hopeful that we at UP Demo and UP, our university in general, with a huge opportunity for collaboration among its experts, can address urban environment management challenges more effectively and hopefully in a way that can be applied in different urban landscapes in our country, like the Manila Bay. So that would be all.
Thank you, Landscape Architect Bunyo. So before we entertain our questions from the YouTube page and the Zoom link, maybe we could hear a few reactions or comments from our four speakers based on the reactions given by our three reactor members. Do we have any other
Yes,
reactions?
if I may, Frank.
Please, sir. Yes, sir. Go ahead, please.
Dr. Fay and Dr. Zamora on public health and physical realities of people living in cities are extremely connected, and one of the reasons why public parks were invented in modern cities in the West in the late 19th century was because of the deleterious effects of industrialization, where people were forced to live congested right next to the factory. So pollution killed them. There was no relief from the congestion, and parks were seen as a corrective to be able to give physical space for people to have recreation and relief. And it was supposed to cure what they call the miasma of disease. And congestion is a contributor to vectors of disease. It enhances the spread of, especially now, COVID. And that is the reality we have to correct. And this congestion cannot be solved by dumping Dolomite in the corner of the bay, because it was just a photo op and it was an easy target for media and civic groups to attack because of the high cost that it entailed. Whereas we should really look at, in the long term, the corrective would be to find opportunities for public open space. In Singapore and Hong Kong and Kuala Lumpur, any other country except ours, in Singapore, no one is more than 10 minutes walk away from a public park. Now, mentally, you need open space to relieve yourself. Physically, you need the space for distance. Now, the very quick corrective in Metro Manila, because we have very few parks, it's only Rizal Park, which is only 58 hectares, and Quezon City Memorial, which is only 25. We have 1/20th the open space that Singapore has, and 1/30th the open space that Hong Kong has for its citizens, which are public, open, accessible. The quick corrective is open up all of the military camps. All the military camps have wide expanses of parade grounds and landscape areas, including several private or several golf courses. If you open this up, will have hundreds of hectares of space that could be used by people. Eventually, of course, the solution in the long term for a lot of the congestion in Metro Manila, where 1/3 of the population lives in 1/4 to 1/3 live in informal settlements, is the provision of social housing. So the onus is on government because they have not provided social housing at the densities that are safe, with access to public open space, with a transport system that can keep them close to where they work. That is the failure of government. So it has to do with public housing, which is related to public health, the relief of congestion. Again, in the long term, we cannot solve it tomorrow. In the long term is to be able to more equitably and more in balance dispersed population throughout the entire Philippines. Metro Manila is 10 times bigger than Metro Cebu, and Metro Cebu is 10 times bigger than a tertiary city. So we are concentrating our people only in certain areas because government has seen it fit or has allowed everything, the neoliberal, to concentrate when we really should encourage the development of urban centers beyond Manila. Now, it's not balik probinsya, which is something we have to correct. For people who study demographics, the increase in population in Metro Manila is by natural reproduction, childbirth. The migration from provinces is very minimal as it affects the total population. It's actually population increase. So the elephant in the room of all of this, especially in a Catholic nation, is population management. And that, again, has an impact on public health because of, I will not get into it. So there are a lot of things that are short-term and long-term in terms of correctives to all of this, but it definitely is not Dolomite. Thank you. Frank, I'm done.
Okay, sir. Dr. Zamora, maybe we could, address some of landscape architect questions.
Well, I agree that health is political and there are many social determinants to health. So hindi mo pwedeng iwan yung health sa doktor kasi it's multifactorial and everyone in the community has a part to share in keeping a healthy community intact. So to answer Dr. Lumberto's question, actually, specifically, I think he was asking regarding the qualifier or the specific cutoffs for you to be able to say, is there an increased risk already with exposure to dolomite? So babalikan ko yun. Actually, sir, when I did my literature search, walang actual cutoff na binanggit yung literature. So the literature was actually silent on the absolute number of hours or the absolute number of years necessary for us to be able to have that increased risk associated with this prolonged exposure to dolomite dust. However, specific populations were noted to be at increased risk. So these were the miners, the factory workers, and then the industrial workers. So they were actually labeled as the population that had prolonged and chronic exposure that were susceptible to developing the aforementioned chronic health effects of dolomite exposure. And then to answer the second question, actually, more than dolomite, kagaya nga ng sinasabi ni Dr. Alcazaren, it's actually the multi-dynamic processes within the environment. So hindi lang siya dolomite, hindi lang siya basta air pollution, hindi lang siya basta population congestion, hindi lang siya poor housing. It's actually it working together that predisposes each and every one of us to increase health hazards, not limited only to the respiratory system, but it affects our general well-being. So more than the respiratory effects, I think at this point, it's also important for us to be able to understand that, again, health is multifactorial. You can't leave it to the doctors alone. And then health is very political. So nakadepende siya kung how the leaders would shape the health system and then would shape the other determinants to be able to give a better health system for our country.
If I may, Frank, there's a comment in relation to public health, the concept of morbidity and mortality. Yes, we won't die from inhaling dolomite, but the fact is, and I tell this to a lot of people, everyone in Metro Manila is sick.
Yeah.
Our average health compared to people living in healthier cities, we're so low. We cough a lot. A lot of us have pulmonary disease. A lot of us are affected by our environment. But because of medicines that extend your life or that alleviate just the symptoms, but not the cause of a lot of these diseases, we just plod on. And we're like, I tell people, we're like the frogs in boiling water. We don't know it, but we're being cooked, and eventually we will all die. So that is the state of our metro health. The public health is really connected to city planning and landscape, the deterioration of the landscape around us. Sorry, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we could start just a few questions to get the ball rolling. One question is addressed to Dr. Siringan. A prof in underwater archaeology told the class he viewed the stratigraphy of accumulated garbage via a submersible. Does the underwater layers of garbage mitigate beach erosion? Dr. Siringan? Oh, he's not here with us. Dr. Siringan, please. Yes.
I'm here. Do you have a question for me, or do you want me to ask a question?
Sir, I have a question. Yeah, if I may repeat it.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
All right, sir. A prof in underwater archaeology told the class he viewed the stratigraphy of accumulated garbage via a submersible. Does the underwater layers of garbage mitigate beach erosion?
Well, if you go to Navotas, you'll see a beach made of plastic, and the plastics they are naturally woven, and so one can actually walk over them, and it's relatively stable. The question, though, is, well, in the long run, what will happen to the plastic? It will break down and will contribute to the minute plastics that will float in the water. Okay. So may problema yung plastic, no? Hindi ko sasabihin na makakatulong yung plastic para sa pag stabilize nung beach. I would rather not just to see natural particles rather than plastic along the beach.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Siringan. Maybe we have another question. Sorry if I may. All right. What are the ecological services that are diminished or enhanced in these reclamation initiatives? And are these more valuable than the economic inputs from reclamation? Maybe we could ask our speakers.
Yeah, I can answer part of that.
All right. Go ahead, please, Dr. Vallejo.
Pinakita ko yung slide parang niya sa lapat ng Baclaran sa wide sand and mud.
I think that's for Benji Vallejo.
That was supporting significant fishery. Actually, before the late national scientist Ed Gomez died, tinanong ko kasi he grew up on Menlo Street in Pasay. When he was young, namumulot siya ng mga halaan at batotoy from in front of where Mall of Asia is now, at kinakain daw nila sa bahay nila sa Menlo Street. So, in fact, one of the first projects of the late Dr. Ed Gomez was to assess yung shell fishery in Parañaque. That was when he came back from his doctoral studies in marine biology in the early 70s. So it was really contributing a lot of subsistence fisheries. Now at that time, wala naman tayong fishery statistics. Ngayon lang naman nagkakaroon ng fishery statistics. And some of that work was done not in the Manila Bay area, but our colleagues from UP Visayas, sila Dr. yung mga taga UP Visayas, they were actually sila
Tanabel
Bell Campos.
Campos.
They've been doing all that estimation of how much you can earn from a mud flat just from collecting shells, and it could be around 1,000 to 1,500 US dollars a year, and that would bring out coastal families from extreme poverty uh, as defined by the UN. So essentially, if you have a lot of it can really support a substantial coastal economy in which the benefits are more widely distributed than if you reclaim it and put commercial developments in which the profits from capital will go only to the stockholders and a few investors that may take it out of the country. So malaki yung mako-contribute niya. No? Unfortunately, we don't have statistics on the gleaning fisheries of Manila Bay in the past. No? So whatever we had, and I've been trying to estimate this with my PhD student who's a resource economist. Mahirap talaga kasi wala tayong data eh. Yun lang but we can have an idea of how much it would have cost, no? Given. Ecosystem services, obviously we need to the natural features like mangroves would be a damper against storm surges, and there is evidence to show that from other countries. No? And also, kasi I just want to emphasize this point, no? The Mandamus, as you can see, only mandates the improvement of water quality. Okay, I have no problem with that, but that's just only one aspect of the total environmental quality. Now, and obviously, people in the government are actually approaching it as an engineering intervention, like yung STP. No, I'm not saying na hindi kailangan na STP. Of course, we need that, no, and putting sewerage, sewering the whole of the metropolis. Okay, that's good. Okay, and beach nourishment is an engineering intervention, but we have to go beyond that. No, there are other ways of enhancing the shoreline, and this would be natural ways, no, as is being done in some parts of China now, and also, and I think and architect Paulo is aware of this. Sa Singapore, ginagawa na yung natural yung using these coastal plants to stabilize the shoreline. In fact, I've spoken to my colleagues in NUS. Okay, they're using the nilad plant to stabilize the reclaimed areas in Singapore. So sabi ko sa kanila, maybe you should rename your city as Manila. Okay? Because you have more nilad. They call it Chongsham. There's a Singaporean name for that. We don't have a single nilad in the city of Manila. There is one in La Papachea. Okay? And when I went back before the pandemic, hinahanap ko, hindi ko na siya makita. So perhaps that could be one of the approaches, open areas, green spaces, which both have human health and environmental health benefits. No? And perhaps we can bring the nilad plant. So we've been telling si Mayor of Manila, Isko Moreno, maybe we should consider bringing it back to Manila kasi wala. Nasa Las Piñas yung kaisa-isahang nilad natin dito sa malapit sa atin.
But the Pasig in Manila, there's no opportunity to plant the nilad because all of the revetments are concrete.
Yun yun ang problema natin eh.
Singapore is changing to soft solutions, which is phytoremediation using plants instead of concrete, because plants and plant-based engineering is found out to be stronger than concrete in the long run. It's more sustainable. Yet we here are still using concrete for all of our, except very small projects, we're still using concrete as our default. I'm sorry to butt in.
Yeah, okay lang. I also spoke with with beach nourishment experts from Hainan in China. No, I met them in Qingdao. Yung strategy nila is the engineering intervention is just assisting the natural process. So sand deposition, the engineering intervention should enhance sand deposition and not replace it. Yun yung kanilang philosophy ngayon.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, in other places that eventually will need sand nourishment, are all of our other towns and cities, especially those islands which have been targeted already for tourism development, which will come back in the next 3, 4, 5 years. So places like Siargao will be exposed to erosion if we allow resort development, resort and urban development to come up very close to shore. So the easements that they have set for all of this are too small. Because as you know, if the more you compromise the natural buffer between the sea, the foreshore and the near shore and the land area, the more prone it is to erosion. So the easements that are being set now by DOT are not enough to sustain long-term development of tourism destinations. We have to address that now. 25 meters is not enough.
Yeah, sa Phuket kasi it's 200 meters.
Yes.
100 meters sa Phuket after the Indian Ocean tsunami. Minove nila lahat ng resorts around more than 100 meters from the foreshore.
Well, in Miami, they can't move it anymore because the 20-story, 30-story condominiums are already at the shoreline.
All right. Thank you. Maybe we could just entertain last one question. Actually, the questions are starting to come in, but maybe we could just entertain one more question for tonight's webinar. What could be other sustainable methods or quote-unquote better alternatives to Dolomite that are more suitable to Manila-based conditions in terms of the natural and built environment? Maybe we could hear from our speakers. Or is there an alternative? Sir Paulo?
The first thing we have to do is to stop reclamation. And then to mitigate the effect of whatever reclamation we already have. I mean, the fact that we have accretion in the areas between the American Embassy and CCP is already an indication of the problem, which cannot really be solved except by hard engineering. And then you have the area between the CCP all the way to the casinos and all the way to Sangley Point. Now, if you keep on reclaiming, then the problem just gets more complicated. The more you allow, and this is where governance and politics comes in, because then you have to contend with the 5 or 6 LGUs that have jurisdiction over the areas of this reclamation, because everyone wants to reclaim. The governments want to allow it, and so the problem gets even more complicated with all of these interventions, and nobody is coordinating or looking at the overall. Of course, the DENR supposedly is looking at this. You have to get the environmental impact assessments and studies approved. But a lot of these things are approved even without knowing what's going to be the reclamation function and the configurations of the reclamations themselves. So everything is a moving target, and you can't do any planning, which is the thing that's missing. You cannot plan if you don't know what's going to be built there, if you don't have a goal, because everyone has their own agenda. We have to look at Manila Bay in a much larger, very large regional context, as the two doctors have told us. The watersheds and the airsheds are the ones that need to delimit the problem and our approach for solutions to the problem. It's not political constructs. What is our biggest problem is that the natural constructs within which we live and die are not the same as the political constructs within which we govern our cities, our towns, our provinces, and our regions. That's the biggest problem.
All right. Thank you, Landscape Architect Alcazaren. Actually, we have several other questions, but we are actually very pressed for time. What we intend to do is collate these questions, and then maybe we could direct them to our speakers, and hopefully they can get back to all of our to your questions. All right. So tonight, to close our webinar, I would like to call on the Dean of the College of Architecture of the UP University of the Philippines, Diliman. May we call on Dr. Grace C. Ramos to give her closing remark. Dean, please.
Hello, good evening. special guest speakers, reactors, members of the Environmental Landscape Studio Laboratory, students, faculty, all the viewers of this wonderful webinar. Truly, the upside of this pandemic has been the continuous flooding of events like this one. We've been wonderfully flooded by webinars. I just came from another one just a few minutes before I signed into this one. And as part of the roundtable discussion, I was asked what the role is of academe in creating new urban futures. And I guess this event pretty much summarizes the answer. Academe, we create hubs for interdisciplinary discussions. We have witnessed tonight the melding of ideas from different disciplines. We've heard from the medical field, the natural sciences, physical sciences, even the social sciences. We do not just complain about issues. We don't just bark at them without basis. Academe provides the venue for systematized thinking, data and evidence-based discourses leading to crafting of solutions, where architects and landscape architects in the college were supposed to think of solutions. Designing is about coming up with solutions to problems. And we have to create new paradigms and new ways of thinking to be able to address all of these issues that we are faced with. And this is just one of the long string of intellectual discourses that we will be organizing. The college has several lined up. The Environmental Landscape Studio Laboratory in particular has so many lined up. Would like to thank you, landscape architect Paulo, suki namin, Dr. Vallejo, Dr. Siringan, Dr. Zamora, our reactors, Ma'am Kalayaan, Sir Mendoza, and Sir Bunyo. Thank you very much for your valuable insights and for your time. We hope to be able to engage you again and again and again, because we need to see more of these convergence of perspectives, because it's through these convergences that we are able to create new knowledge in the process. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dean Ramos. Personally, I'm still holding my breath after Dr. Zamora's lecture. Personally, that was really an eye-opener for me. So in behalf of the UP College of Architecture and the Environmental Landscape Studio Laboratory, we would like to thank once again our partners, the Philippine Association of Landscape Architects, Diliman Environmental Management Office, UP Diliman, the Philippine Association of the Japanese Government Scholars-PHILAJAMES National, UP Circle of Landscape Architecture Students, and the Research and Extension Office of the College of Architecture. Thank you very, very much to our four panel experts, Landscape Architect Paulo Alcazaren, Dr. Benjamin Vallejo Jr., Dr. Fernando Siringan, and Dr. Mithi Kalayaan Zamora. Thank you also to our three reactors who gave us quite energy, Dr. Mendoza, Dr. Kalayaan, and Landscape Architect Bunyo. And to all our viewers, to our live streaming through the Environmental Landscape Studio Laboratory YouTube page, we are thankful that you joined us. You can click the subscribe button for that one so you could view future and past webinars that the Studio Lab has prepared for you. And we also like to say our thanks to the participants in the Zoom link provided by the Research and Extension Office of the College of Architecture. So till our next webinar, we will see you soon, everyone. Do keep safe, and let's all have a good night. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thank
Thank you,
you.
sir.
Good job.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
everyone.